So I'm Matt Zarandi and I'm here today to talk to you about designers and code. So I'm head of design and UX at a company called AOL and based in the international head office in London. And the reason I'm telling you this is for two reasons. Number one, as we've seen previously in Chris's talk, I think it's really good to have a sense of perspective where somebody's coming from in delivering a talk. Because maybe something doesn't apply to you in the same way, but hopefully with the overlying themes, you can then take those with the sense of perspective and apply it to your day-to-day. We all work in different sized agencies. Some of us work in-house, some of us work with other international teams, etc. So we're all different. And because we keep talking about lunch, and I know probably everybody's really hungry, you're going to preempt the question I'm going to get at the end, which is what the hell does AOL do? So AOL isn't the Running Man. It's not 5,000 hours of free internet on a CD on every magazine in Sainsbury's. It's not that anymore. Changed a lot over the years and in a really good place now. And simply put, we're a content and advertising business. And I work specifically on the content side. And I work with some of these brands that you may recognize below. And if you don't know some of those, hopefully you will in the near future. And we're a large company. We've got about 6,000 employees across the world. And we're owned by a much larger company, the behemoth that is Verizon. And yeah, the offices that we have across the world are in most of the locations shown there, nearly 30. And we're not just sales teams in those offices. We're talking fully functioning product teams. If we're talking Huffington Post, we've got nearly, I think last time I checked, there's like nearly 20 editions. So most of those spaces there. If I'm working on a video product, I may be working with the team based in Israel. So there's a lot of people working together, making the products tick, and hopefully delivering experiences that really are meaningful with our end user, wherever they may be in the world. So, got that bit out of the way. So let's move on. So why did I decide to do my talk today about designers and code? Well, to be honest, if you were asking me this question 2 years ago, I probably wouldn't have been thinking about talking about it. I didn't realize it was that much of an issue. And one of my good friends wrote this article in Medium, and every time she writes something, I always take note, because I think she's a fantastic designer, Leanne Pickering, if you want to look her up. And she basically was writing against designers coding. And she said that designers and code, if we're talking about putting those together, we're really trivializing two professions there. And they have both a lot going on between those two individual professions, and putting them together, it's not really doing them justice. And within that article, to formulate her argument at the start, she had two quotes. First, arguing that designers should code, because if you can't implement your work, how do you expect to be able to control it? And on the flip side of that, we had, well, if you just hire people merely on their skill set, well, are you actually saying then that you're missing out on the people with the really good ideas who are really valuable in brainstorming? And if you're not focusing on your craft, then how are you going to become a better designer? So I read this article, looked at both of those, and I thought, well, I'm kind of in between here. Like, I'm not really going to take sides at the moment. And in deciding what I was, to formulate my opinion and think of, like, what do I want to have on this? Well, I did what most people may do at this point. I went to the holy grail of all knowledge, and I said, Google, help me out, mate. You've helped me out all through my life. I'm going to ask you, should designers code? And you're going to give me the answer. And today it said, can't help you, mate. I'm going to give you 5 for, 5 against. Deal with it yourself. I was like, Google, I'll remember this in the near future. I may need you again, and I may go elsewhere. Who knows? So yeah, so I went away and I thought about this for some time. I thought, I work with teams internally, and I have designers that work with me. And is this something we should be thinking about when I'm hiring? Should I be thinking about this? And also thinking about my future as a designer. Like, is this something I need in my repertoire to be able to be a better designer? And I went away, went to a few meetups as well, and I spoke with a lot of people, different levels of their career, different roles that they played within businesses, some agencies, some in-house, spoke to developers, spoke to PMs, etc. And it was amazing. Like, I got a lot of people giving me a different answer. Some were at both ends of the spectrum, some were in between, which I thought was really interesting. And even more to the point, I was under the impression that I was hiring recently, that most people coming out of uni would be coding. That's just something that was taught at uni, and that's what they'd be doing. But amazingly, I was getting people coming through, and they said, you know what, I've got no interest in it whatsoever, and I never want to be able to code. That's not something I want to do. I was like, okay, I didn't think that would be the case. So I went away and thought about it some more, and I spoke with my team, and I spoke with other people around the team, spoke with developers, spoke with PMs, etc. And in the end, we had a go. We thought, right, let's bring it into our working process, see what happens. You never know. It may not be right for us. Maybe it's just something that is good for small agencies. Maybe we can't integrate it into our workflow. And in the end, when we thought about it, after doing all the things that we did, should designers code? Well, it was a big fat yes. For us, in our role, where we work, in our day-to-day, that's what we saw, that we saw a really big impact. And we saw the impact across 3 different areas, mainly. So we saw that designers are experimenting more and better at it. And because we're at Collaborate, better collaboration as well. That was one of the biggest areas that we saw. Designers being able to code gave us better collaboration with our engineering teams and other teams around the world as well. And we also saw that the experiences that we were creating as a team, we felt were better, and that was also resonating with our users as well. With the feedback we got was, yeah, the experience is better. In terms of our PR internally, people are really commending us on the work that we're producing. So for us, we thought, yeah, it definitely is something that we should be doing. And I'm going to go dive into those a little bit and tell you why we think those were really good for us. And then in the end, wrap it up and say where we draw the line in designers being able to code. And I'm going to put an asterisk on the yes now. We don't say it's anything to do with the engine of the site. We're not talking anything that's to do with the back end, etc. We're talking about the things that actually have an impact on the experience from a front end point of view. So, experimentation. I'm going to take a step back now and look at the early days of my career anyway. And on the screen there, we have what print designers used to use for their main tool of choice, which is called Quark Express. Who here remembers Quark Express? That's surprising. That's cool. So you all know how painful it was to get a PDF out of there and how you had to debug just to be able to go to the printer with your tool when you've got an hour left before a deadline. It was a nightmare, but it was a tool we used at the time. And when we managed to get that PDF out, we took it to the printers, and they may be using something called a litho machine. And just for those that don't know what Quark, actually, if you don't know what Quark is, you're making everyone who put their hand up feel really old right now. But if you don't know what Quark is, you may have not been to a printer before, and you may not know what a litho machine does. So a litho machine, basically, put your artwork in, and there's 4 plates stacked up, cyan, magenta, yellow, and black. Line them perfectly, paper goes through, you get your ink build up on the page, and then out the other end, you get the design. That's a really, really short way of putting it. And if all went to plan, you'd see something like this. So when the printer got the piece of paper out at the end, before he cut it, there'd be a few marks around the edges, this one being a registration mark. And this mark here shows the printer that those plates that I just mentioned are perfectly aligned. We're seeing cyan, magenta, yellow, and black, all the ink built up perfectly on the page, and therefore we're getting a full, rich color black. Everything's good. But then sometimes we see this. And when a printer sees this, they're like, oh, crap, something's wrong. The plates aren't aligned. We need to go back and do this again. The images may be blurry, text may be blurry. This isn't good. But then as a designer, and I was one of the people in this camp, I looked at that and I thought, that's actually quite cool. Obviously not for this design, I want it to come out perfectly, but actually, could I use this in future? Could I do something with it? So printers and designers would start working together. The designer would understand the printing process, how it's working, and they go back and say, hey, I've got this design here. Could I try actually having the plates purposely misaligned and just see what comes out? And experimenting, having fun to see what they could create. And as they're going away and doing that, they're also starting to look at messing with different inks, looking at different paper stocks, and they're playing around, they're having fun, and maybe what they're doing at that moment in time isn't relevant to today and the job that they're working on and the projects that are within the agency or company that they're in now. But maybe in future it could be useful. And when that time comes, well, they've got that in their repertoire. They've got that technique. They've got that in their arsenal, so they can go, hey, you know what? Done this before. This would be really good here. So they're becoming better designers because of it. And it's really important to say that they're having fun whilst they're doing it. And I kind of think as we've gone through the stages, I mean, if I had to put an overarching term, what I do is I'm a product designer. Going through and becoming a product designer, I kind of feel like we've lost the fun a little bit, and we've lost that experimentation phase, and we've lost playing in the end medium in which we work in. So if you think about the Quark Express, that's basically like all the tools that we use today. And if you look at the printing machine, that's basically devices and browsers that we have today. So why aren't we playing in that end medium? And this is not great by any stretch of the margin, but I'm trying to get a point across, which hopefully you'll be able to see. when I'm playing about and I'm putting an animation into something, and oh, it is playing, cool. I can see on the screen what's happening. I can play about with the animation. It's nothing spectacular, but I can start to change that look and feel. I can start to put other things on the page, other elements of interaction, see them all working at the same time, and try and build what the emotion that I'm trying to put into this product and the feeling I want to give off. I can start working with that. I don't feel like I can do that in any of the tools that I have today, other than being able to code, put it in here, and have a play. And I'm not saying you have to be able to code perfectly. You don't have to be able to do that. You could play in an inspector and see what you get. And in the, when we were looking at Huffington Post, for instance, when I'm working across multiple editions, creating one product for all these different languages, it's really helpful for me to see what live text looks like, and if my design is going to break at 329 pixels versus 16782 pixels, whatever it may be. And being able to play in the browser tells me that. So I feel like, just like Quark Express was very limiting for a print designer, you can't actually see the real end result as to what you're going to get until you actually put it in the printing machine and it comes out the other end. I kind of feel that the tools we use today sometimes are not giving us the best representation of what we're trying to do, and we're not allowing ourselves to see maybe what we're trying to achieve as the end goal. So at AOL, designers being able to code. We've seen really, really great things with experimentation. And at the same time, you're experimenting, you're learning. Whilst I was doing this, I learned new CSS techniques I never knew before. They're not on there, but I was looking at something called perspective origin, never heard of it. Now I know what it does, and I know its limitations now. So when I'm looking to use it in future, I'm aware of the repercussions of what I'm designing. Maybe it's not going to work cross-browser, et cetera, et cetera. So experimentation. Number one, that's where we see that designers have really benefited from knowing how to code and being able to code as well. Now collaboration. And collaboration's where we saw the very biggest impact with designers being able to code. And again, I'm going to take a step back and go to the early days. That is a website. And that is a website from the 90s full of dancing baby GIFs. And it was easy back then. I mean, you just had a couple of devices going to that site, getting the website, putting it on the screen, and that was it. And it was maybe a one-page site, 20-page site, what have you, wasn't responsive, and all you had to worry about was some browser inconsistencies. And then as time's gone on, we've got to this. And multiple devices now accessing that same site, all with different viewport sizes. And we're having to think about, right, we're having to think responsively, how can we serve the very best experience at every touch point here? And there were changes that happened here. There's changes in user behavior. There's changes in the hardware that people are using and the devices that people are using to access your site. You're having to think about, are they on 3G? Are they on 4G? Are they on Wi-Fi? What time of day are they connecting? We've got all these different changes we're having to think about. And it's got really complex. So obviously, as teams in our company, we've had to collaborate more in order to achieve results and try and deliver the best experience across these touch points. But if that wasn't bad enough, we've seen things get even more complex. So now we've got off-platform experiences. So in publishing, this is a really big thing at the moment. We're not in full control of how people interact with our brands. Those areas there could be Snapchat. It could be a notification on an iPhone. It could be Facebook Instant Articles. It could be any of those. And we're not in full control. So to combat all this, what have we done as designers over the course of time? Well, we've increased the number of tools that we're using on a day-to-day basis. And I look at that and I think it's an absolute mess where we are now. I don't look at that and think, oh, it's really good that we've got these tools to achieve these end results. I think, well, now we've got people using Sketch with umpteen amount of plugins. And that makes it really difficult in terms of collaborating with other designers across the world, because maybe they haven't got the same plugins as you. And if they don't, and you're saying, oh, I can't deliver it into you any other way, well, they have to install that plugin, work out how it works, and then they can actually start using your design. Same for Photoshop. Same for Framer. Framer I really don't get, and maybe some people use it here. I don't understand why you'd learn a JavaScript language that isn't actually transferable. It doesn't make sense to me whatsoever. Do you agree or do you disagree? I don't know. So yeah, these tools aren't telling me about the browser inconsistencies. They're not telling me that. So if I'm, say, putting a stroke on an element, well, Firefox isn't going to give me that. It's only going to appear in all the other browsers, so it's not telling me these issues. It's not telling me, is my animation going to play well across every single device? It's not telling me that. And the only way I can see all these things is just being able to actually put what I'm trying to do in the browser, test it, and see if it works. And in the interest of collaboration, when we work with our developer friends, sometimes you may have really good developers who are like, hey, give me that sketch file with Zeppelin in it or whatever, or give me that Photoshop file with all your layers nicely put up, and I will go in there and I will have a look and I'll measure everything and make sure I get your design absolutely right. However, working in a company where there's 1,000 developers, not every developer can do that. And if I'm interacting with a team in Bangalore, for instance, who are developing a product, or Israel, or on the west coast of the US, it's going to be very, very different. And the only way I can actually guarantee that they're going to see exactly what I'm trying to get across is put it in the format they understand, which is code. And I'm not saying code as in has to be fully functional, has to have everything plugged in, super, super good. It's not about that. It's just getting that message across. And they will understand far more from that than just handing over a file in one of these mediums. And I know Sketch will give you CSS values for things. Of course it will. But when you're talking about something that's maybe quite complex, maybe you want to put that in the browser and actually do it properly in that sense and just focus on that one element, because if you try to get too deep with some of these programs, they're going to spurt out a lot of crap code, and that is just something that infuriates developers. Don't want to do that at the best of times. They're the gatekeepers to actually our end product looking amazing. So yeah, so that's one thing in which coding helps with collaboration in that sense. But looking at developers, well, we've changed the tools we've used over time. I say code should be one of those tools that we put in there. And we've also changed our processes. So we've gone into Agile and whatever form of lean someone's managed to bring up into the team. We're doing all these different things. And what I assume most people are doing, apart from Chris who's doing everything, which I think is absolutely amazing, we're actually getting developers in the room together at the start of a project. We're getting product managers in. We're getting all these stakeholders, editorial, analytics teams, researchers, sales teams, etc., smashing out the idea of a project, getting that buy-in, absolutely awesome. And we're doing the same as we go into design phase. We're designing with our teammates, which is really, really good. And it feels like, as we've done that, we've kind of said to development, you come over and really get a good understanding of UX. We really need you to understand why we're iterating, why we're making all these changes, why the users matter more than doing a new way of coding or this tech. It doesn't matter about the tech. It's all about the end user and what they want. And what's really good, at AOL they've done that, but I'm not sure about in your respective places if they've done the same. But they've actually really bought into it over time, which is absolutely awesome. But then I think they've come over 70% into us, and we're all ideating together. We're all designing together. Why the hell are we not building together? And that, for me, doesn't make sense. So should we not actually say 50-50 split? We should be moving over into development a little bit. And I think by doing that, we're not actually then saying, we're taking over. I think that we actually take our conversations to a higher level. And because of that, we see better prototypes, better end products. And to hit this across, I'm going to use a really crude football example. And we're going to create a football team, and it's going to be a cheesy name, Collaborate FC. And we're going to get a player. I've got a really good agent, and he's managed to sign a superstar from Paris Saint-Germain, which is awesome. And then he's having a really good day. He's actually managed to get someone from Barcelona. Awesome, again. Signed someone from Bristol Rovers. Fans in the room, no? OK. And I excuse the animation on the next one, because at the time, my team were doing all right when I made this, but they're crap now. So we've got a forward from Wolverhampton Wanderers, but they're still hoping to score some goals. And if you look at this team, what are they trying to do? They're a football team. What's the end goal? They score goals, they win a game. That's it. And if you put a bunch of product designers and developers, et cetera, in a room and say, go create something, and they're creating it to the requirements, et cetera, and what the users want, well, they'll create something, and it'll go out the door, and it's great, they scored a goal. Awesome. But if we look at this example here, we've got somebody from Paris Saint-Germain who may be speaking Brazilian. We've got someone from Barcelona who's maybe speaking Argentinian. Someone from Bristol with a Bristol accent, and someone from Wolverhampton with a Wolverhampton accent. And they're not speaking the same language, so they're only going to go and score a goal that is maybe quite clunky, but they're not going to win goal of the month, they're not going to win goal of the season, they're not going to create, as designers and developers, they're not going to create that amazing end product. They're not all speaking the same language. And I'm not talking about sometimes people in the room together. If you're working with people outside your room, outside your office, in different countries, it helps to be able to speak the same language. And I think by doing that, we start to create the Arsenal-esque goal, we start to create the Real Madrid-style goal, we start to create amazing, amazing products by having that level playing field in which we all speak the same language and taking the conversations to a high level. So, there's a chap who I respect massively. He's called Cat Watkins, who's Vice President of Design at BuzzFeed. And he's done this at places he's worked before, at Etsy, and he's applied designers being able to code at BuzzFeed. And he said it's not about it's not about designers, just got my 10-minute warning. It's not about designers taking over engineering. It's not about that. It's not about becoming these full stack people, the unicorns of the world. Nothing to do with that. It's actually about creating better collaboration with their engineering partners. And I fully agree with this, and it's definitely what we've seen at AOL by doing this. And I actually asked one of my developers this week that I hadn't actually spoken to about this since we started to work in this manner. And this is what he said when I said, what do you think about it? He said, you know what? I think the best thing about it is that a designer understands the implications of the design decisions on development. He said, for me, that's the biggest thing. And then he's also had a little, snide kick and said, there is a danger that designers may get a bit too big for their boots and start dictating what should be done, telling the developer how to code. And I don't see that as a bad thing. That means that the conversations are happening. And I think the developers actually appreciate it because usually we were referred to, when I first started at AOL anyway, as a dumb designer, really. Like, we don't know what we're doing. We're just putting stuff into development. We haven't really thought about things correctly. And I'm going to come back to that in the next step, in the next part of the talk anyway. But definitely some really good impact on designers being able to code on collaboration. Now, experiences, final one. So these, if you don't know what they are we've got Apple News, Facebook Instant Articles, and Google AMP. And this is really shaking up the publishing industry because this is the off-platform experience that I'm talking about. It's hard to make money when the content's being consumed off your platform on these, but putting that to one side, I'm going to talk about designing for these. And it was literally in the past 3 weeks, month, I was asked to look at the Huffington Post experience on Apple News. And the reason I put this in here is because it's the first time I've ever designed anything where I haven't had to touch a design tool. I didn't need to do it. And the only way I could design for a platform which we don't own and we don't control was understanding what I could do on those platforms and understanding the limitations. And it required me to read an Apple News developer document, go through it and try and work out what I could do, where were the limitations, what are other people not doing that it does allow you to do, why is that, is it going to take longer for me to be able to put this together? And the way that you actually, for those that don't know, the way you actually get your design into the Apple News flow is you actually create a JSON feed, you put that into your content distribution platform, that applies it to any articles going out, and then that's what Apple News shows. So I had to actually create a JSON feed and then put that into an Apple News preview, check to see what I was doing was OK, and then apply that into the Content Hub, and then bada bing, bada boom, it was done. And I found that really amazing because it's the first time I've ever had to do that. I hadn't had to touch a design program. I wasn't dictating what the user experience could be up to a point because I was only allowed to do certain things. I was essentially just applying the brand into that space. But it's important, as we know, to make sure we've got brand consistency wherever we go. Try and have the same look and feel. Try and get the same emotion and message across with the brand to the consumer. And first time it's happened, and I imagine it's going to happen again in the future. But let's look at why these things were created in the first place. Well, simply put, speed, performance. That's why these things were created in the first place. And we know speed and performance is really important because every second counts with users. We know in e-commerce, for instance, Amazon and Walmart, direct correlation between the speed and the performance of your site and sales. And in publishing, it's the same kind of thing. The faster your site is, the better performance you get. Well, you're going to have more people reading the content on your site. So it's really, really important. And as designers, as developers, we both have roles to play in performance. And as UXers, we're saying perceived performance, really, really important thing. And as developers, we're looking at the actual performance of the site. What is the data packet that we're downloading? And I actually think that as designers, we could have more of an impact on the actual performance. So not going to go into debate about skeuomorphism and flat design, but we've been there, we've done it, really helped with the responsive movement, and we basically stripped the fat out of our designs. But that was from a visual sense, and as designers, we weren't really looking at the code aspect of it. Why could we not strip out some of the code that was really, really pulling the design down? And we all have these things called style guides, I hope, in our businesses, really, really important things. And as designers, you may have coded them up yourselves, and if you're lucky, you've got a living style guide, big buzz thing at the moment. But let's go back to what I was talking about before and stripping out the fat. So as a designer, if I'm looking at the patterns within here, maybe I could look at a pattern that I have and go, well, I'm looking at that, and that's quite an old thing. Maybe it's just the humble or much loathed carousel. And looking at that, and it's still using JavaScript to flick through all the items in the carousel. And it's in this pattern, so I know, and in the style guide, so I know it's being used across the site. And looking at it and thinking, well, on mobile side, it's a clunky performance, and on the desktop, it's all right, but actually, I want to redesign that anyway. It's not the best experience anymore. So if I was to actually look at that and design it differently with performance in mind, and look at, with my knowledge now, I know I don't need JavaScript, I can do it with CSS, and actually I'm going to give a better performance on mobile as well. Well, because it's a pattern in my style guide and it's used site-wide, instantly I've actually improved the performance of my site on many different pages. And if you went through your style guide and thought, you know what, I did that design thing, and I know there's a lot of code being able to actually make that thing look all sexy and really nice, but does it really need to be there? Could I actually strip it away? And by doing that, you can actually have a big impact on performance site-wide as a designer looking at the actual performance as well. So we've seen that there is an impact with designers being able to code, especially at AOL. If they have an impact on the experimentation side, collaboration side, and the, what was the other one? Experience side as well. And that's been fantastic, but where's the line? Where do we draw the line as designers being able to code? So at AOL, we've said before, as I mentioned, we're not talking about the engine of the site at all. We're talking about front end, the interaction side. And we have to remember that the companies that we work with, they're huge. The brands that we work with, they're huge. We're talking, the Huffington Post in 20 locations across the world, Engadget across 5, millions and millions of users interacting every single day. So to be honest, I don't really want a designer touching something that could really, really cause a meltdown across the entire globe of our brand. Don't want that at all. And developers, they're also very protective of their code. So what we have said is, well, the developers anyway, they've actually been so kind as to say in the CMS, you're going to have a little pen where you can write your CSS, and it's going to override anything that's on the page. And that's absolutely awesome, because we've mentioned it before about when I just walked in, I was hearing about somebody talking around how do you get your, we talk about UX debt and how do we get stuff done. And if we're looking at the visual side of things, how many times does something go live and you think, geez, that thing is 1 pixel to the left. Why did the developer do that? Just put it to the right, please. It's driving me mad. You can't put a ticket in for that because you just look stupid. There's no way you're going to get it. Yeah, you're not going to get it done, are you? And it's a pain, and it drives me up the wall sometimes. We know Google, and everybody went mad when they made their design 1 pixel different. But it matters, like it matters to the team, taking pride in the visual design as well. And developers, they don't want somebody knocking on their door every 5 seconds going, mate, could you just move it a pixel that way? Actually, you know what was better before? Could you put it back? And could you just change the color? You don't want any of that. So be able to actually dive in and add some CSS on your own, it's not that hard. And no longer are we pestering the developers saying, could you do this? And instead, we're actually saying, here's a bunch of stuff that we've done. Can we put it into this sprint and get all those changes? It's enough for maybe one story point for a developer to work on, but then it actually means something. It matters. And that took a lot of hard work to get there. It involved us actually working with developers, showing them that we knew what we were on about, and we're not just a dumb designer. We actually understand their pain points, and we can actually work with them and work around that, and hopefully, in doing so, make their lives easier, have the empathy for them, and create a happier team who's creating better products. Now, we have seen some pitfalls, and the biggest one that we saw is when designers were looking to introduce code into their workflow, and they weren't doing so before. Well, it took a lot of time sometimes to do the most basic thing. And you have to kind of work with designers and understand where their limitations are. And I'm in this boat too. I once spent an entire week trying to work on one page because I was trying to debug something, which is a complete waste of time. It's ridiculous. I shouldn't have done that. But it's hard to draw yourself away once you're so invested into something. So the tools we have today are still really, really helpful. And if I'm looking to do that entire page, maybe I didn't have to do that entire page. Maybe I should have just focused on that one element that really mattered. That functionality had to be nailed. So I do that one thing in the browser and then give that to a developer and say, this is what I want in this section, but here are all my files for the rest. We saw designers, when they're putting notes around the design saying, this should be this color, they're actually putting it in CSS format and the wrong format, which absolutely infuriated developers, so we stopped doing that. And then when we're working with the international teams, we found that sometimes they're actually copying and pasting the code, and maybe that's flattering, maybe they're saying to us, oh, we thought you were a developer, but we're saying we're not developers, we actually expect you to implement this in the best way possible. And as designers, we still communicate, we don't know the best way to develop this, we're just trying to get the message across, but we're expecting you to step in as the experts and actually implement this into the core code base in the best and way possible as you see fit. So we definitely believe designers being able to code makes a huge difference in the quality of products we create. And I know I'm 40 seconds over, but just in case you're not convinced, what about these things here? So I talked before that for the first time ever, I actually didn't use a front-end design program to design something. In these instances here, you may be using your typical wireframing tools or your prototyping tools, whatever they are, in order just to get a flow right and get what do you want your product to do. But at the end of the day, if we're looking at testing against Alexa, what are you going to do? Are you going to give a voice response to something and then you have to select an answer and then it gives another voice response? Because that's crap. You don't want to do that because when you're testing, surely you want to have the most lifelike thing in front of the user so you can get the very best results. So coding is going to help you there. And working with chatbots, for instance, I've worked with the WYSIWYG editors that you create a quick chatbot. They're so limiting, and I see other people doing other things. And because it's relatively in its infancy in terms of the wider world, there's not really much that they allow you to do. And if you had coding ability, maybe you can start to do some great things on that nobody else is doing. Again, looking at Apple News, understanding what the platform and the API allows you to do and working with that. So I realize I've raced through that really, really quickly, but thank you very much. If you want to talk about this afterwards, I can only stick around for an hour, but I'm more than happy to go through everything. And yeah, enjoy lunch. Cheers. Cheers.